Why then does Glaucon think that justice or goodness is a thing which is sought only for what comes from it? Glaucon argues like this. He says the best thing that can happen to us is that we act unjustly and get away with it. So say we want something and we take it. Well, that's unjust, that's stealing, but nobody catches us. Great, now we have a new, I don't know, cell phone or something. And the worst thing that can happen to us is that someone acts unjustly towards one and one cannot take revenge upon that person. Maybe somebody steals your new smartphone and that really hurts. Maybe somebody steals your girlfriend or boyfriend. Maybe somebody kills your child. That would be a terrible thing that could happen. Because this is the best and the worst for us, he says, in our societies we enter into agreements for our mutual benefit, and we make a kind of tragic trade-off by agreeing to not act unjustly towards one another. I call this sort of arrangement conventional morality. This is not his term, but mine. But this is his idea. He says that conventional morality, quote, is an intermediate between the best and the worst. So basically we make this deal that we won't kill, steal, rape, lie, cheat, and so on. And, we really do feel like doing those things, but we agree not to do them just so that we won't have those things done to us. And if they are done to us, then we'll have some recourse. People will say, hey, you can't do that. And maybe the law will get involved in things like that, or at least public pressure. Glaucon thinks that conventional morality, the type of morality, say, that your parents raise you with, is an unnatural restriction. He says, by this arrangement, our nature is forced by law into the perversion of treating fairness with respect. A perversion is something which is unnatural, something which warps and twists what is natural. Glaucon's basic idea is the only reason that we act justly is that we lack the power to act unjustly. My analogy is with the practice of Chinese foot binding. Now, I believe this is against the law in China and has been for some time, but in ancient and medieval times in China, men got this strange idea that itty-bitty feet were beautiful on women. I don't really understand this, but here's a picture of it. Here's a picture of a woman that was raised with her feet tightly bound when she was growing up. And it's a terrible thing. It warps and deforms the feet in disgusting ways. And it means they kind of have to hobble around and can only walk very slowly. If you are morbidly curious about this, you can Google up pictures on the internet of what these feet actually look like. The toes are all twisted underneath and so on. So a foot is naturally supposed to develop and grow in a certain way. This foot binding, they tightly tie up the foot in certain ways as a girl is growing up, and that's a perversion of your nature in the sense that the foot is not allowed to develop. So your nature, Glaucon is thinking, is just the desires you find yourself with, and what's best, what would be best for you if you could just act on all the desires, and you could just do what you wanted. That'd be what's best for you. And when you agree to be moral, to be an upstanding citizen, to be a normal member of society, the kind of young man or young woman that your parents surely raised you to be, when you agree to that, you're giving into this tragic trade-off, and it's just because you're not powerful enough to get away with what you really want. You could say that for Glaucon, and really for the sophists generally, from what we know from other sophistic writings from ancient times, the laws of morality are just a convenient societal construct. They're arbitrary, and there's nothing natural or really binding about these rules. They're just arbitrary rules the society comes up with to help us get along. To support this way of looking at morality, Glaucon tells this really fun story called The Myth of Gyges. And there was a movie basically made on a very similar premise, starring Kevin Bacon in the year 2000. It's called Hollow Man. I don't recommend it though. It's a nasty movie. It's not a good movie. But still, what would you do if you could become invisible? I know a lot of you guys would probably head straight for the ladies' locker room and that's usually part of these types of stories. Anyway, in the original myth of Gyges, shepherd boy out one day finds this magic ring, and the ring makes him invisible. And wow, what a power! You know, when he just turns the ring, it makes him invisible. And he uses this ring to sneak into the king's palace, seduce the king's wife, kill the king, and take over the kingdom. Now, Glaucon's point is that we would all do exactly the same sort of thing if we had that power. Even so-called just people or moral people would do this. He thinks you would be a moron to not do it. And he explicitly tells us in Plato's dialogue here what the moral of the story is. The moral is that one is never just willingly, but only when compelled to be. Glaucon thinks that this is a common sense position. He claims that poets praise justice and injustice in this way. Glaucon claims that parents tell their kids to be just only because it leads to a good reputation. So then, if that's right, the parent is only really commending being thought to be just, right? And that's not the same thing. Being a moral person is not the same thing as being thought to be a moral person. Glaucon claims that the only value really is in the reputation. He says the poets say that justice and moderation are hard and have little payoff, quote, while licentiousness, just doing whatever you want, and injustice are sweet and easy to acquire and shameful only in opinion and law. So again, there's an idea that there's nothing really shameful about these or really inappropriate about these things. It's just that they're taboo. They're just against societal norms. But those norms are arbitrary. So that's the sophistic point of view about human goodness or about being a good person. Now, do you agree with this? Do you think that the only value of following the rules of morality is that you have a good reputation from it? Let's consider an ideally maximally just person and an ideally maximal unjust person as a way to test this theory. So consider the following sort of life. Let's call this guy Two-Faced Ted. And this is how his life is. People think that he is a saint. They think that he always does the right thing. They would gladly let him babysit their children. They want him to be a godfather for their children. They just have the highest opinion of Two-Faced Ted. But in fact, Two-Faced Ted does whatever the heck Ted wants to do. And he will gladly ignore conventional morality and act on whatever desires he feels like as long as he can get away with it. And we have to add this, he never gets caught. So if he feels like killing one of his rivals, say in romance, he has the guy killed. Shoot, if he feels like killing somebody with his bare hands, he does it, as long as he can get away with it, not be seen. If he feels like stealing, he steals. If he feels like cheating, he cheats. If he feels like lying, he lies. But he's the luckiest man in the world. No one ever finds him out. He manages to hide all of this misbehavior. And the thing about his life is he always gets his way. He never has to restrain his desires. According to Glaucon, this would be as happy a person as there could be. This person is truly well off. Now let's compare this with the following life. Call her Misunderstood Mary. Now, Misunderstood Mary is, let's say, a perfectly moral person, or let's say as close as a human being can get, if you think a human can't be perfectly moral. She always considers the interests of others before her own interests. She is compassionate, loving, kind, forgiving, generous, truthful, and just everything you would want in a friend, everything you would want in a parent or a child, let's say. So she's a greater saint than Mother Teresa. But here's the catch. She has a really, really terrible, awful reputation. She's been lied about, let's say, falsely accused. There's been some horrible misunderstandings through no fault of her own. People think that she's a child pornographer, a murderer. They think that she sells heroin to kindergartners. I think she's a tax cheat, a thief, and a racist, and a bigot. And they think she's stupid too. So her reputation is lower than even than an average member of Congress. And it gets worse. Um, Ted, let's say Ted lives a perfectly long life. He lives to be, let's say, 95, and he never gets caught. He just gets away with it all. He lives like a boss. Mary, in contrast, gets accused of all these terrible, horrible crimes at, let's say, the age of 20. And because they catch her in Texas and not in New York, they give her the death penalty. And she gets executed at the age of 20. Now, according to Glaucon, at the end of her life, Mary will realize what a fool, what a chump she's been. That she should have not cared at all about being a good person, but only cared about reputation and done what she could to preserve her reputation. Ted will reap all the benefits, of course, of a spotless reputation, as well as the benefits, the pleasures of his many misdeeds. Here's one way that Glaucon describes a person like Ted, who is able to follow their desires unhindered. He rules his city because of his reputation for justice. He marries into any family he wishes. He gives his children to marriage to anyone he wishes. He has contracts and partnerships with anyone he wants. And besides benefiting himself in all these ways, he profits because he has no scruples about doing injustice. In any contest, public or private, he's the winner and outdoes his enemies. And by outdoing them, he becomes wealthy, benefiting his friends and harming his enemies. He makes adequate sacrifices to the gods and sets up magnificent offerings to them. He takes better care of the gods, therefore, than a just person does. Hence it's likely that the gods in turn will take better care of him than of a just person. That's what they say, Socrates, that gods and humans provide a better life for unjust people than for just ones. In the last segment of this lecture, we will look at objections to this theory of Ted's. But my point is, if you agree with him in his theory about human happiness, you will agree that Ted is as happy as a person could be, and Mary is totally happy. She does not have a good life. She is not well off. So here is my summary of Glaucon's sophistic theory of being well off, or having a happy life. To have a happy life, to be well off, is to have a life of doing what one wants without regard to conventional morality. Yeah, maybe it fits conventional morality, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it depends on what day. Doing all that while enjoying a spotless reputation for being moral. Is that what it is to be well off? In the next segment, we'll look at objections to this.